The other day I said that we might have gotten al-Baghdadi, that's the leader of ISIS, with a drone strike. And I said, look, I didn't think drone strikes were going to be that effective. I thought you should send in special forces. But I said if we got him and we killed him through a drone strike, well, then my bad, and I'm wrong about that. And we put that video up. Well, it turns out I'm probably not wrong. In fact, we appear to have not gotten him. And I don't care if he's more angry. He was already angry enough to begin with. That part I don't care about. I do care that if we had sent special forces, and look, that's not an easy thing. I'm not pretending that it's easy. You get the job done more effectively. Bin Laden, if we did a bombing, we don't know if we got him or not. You go on the ground, you put a couple of bullets in his head, you know you got him. All right, so what we have now is reports in from the Middle East. The Islamic State group has released an audio recording, it said, of its chief, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, days after an airstrike on jihadist leaders in Iraq sparked rumors he had been wounded or killed. So he appears to be alive. The recording, they explain in The Guardian, which was carried on jihadist websites, appeared authentic, and the man's voice appeared to correspond with previous recordings released by the group. Now, what did he say in the recording? In the message, the man calls for attacks in Saudi Arabia, said the caliphate was expanding across the Arab world, and called for, quote, volcanoes of jihad across the globe. That does not sound fun. I'm anti-volcanoes of jihad. And what did I tell you earlier? I said, watch out if they go into Saudi Arabia, then we have a giant cluster, well, bomb. Okay, we've got a lot of clusters if they go into Saudi Arabia and do it effectively, because then we will panic. We'll send in ground troops like you've never seen before, and we'll be right back in the soup again. Speaking of which, well, that's exactly what Martin Dempsey's talking about. He's the head of the Joint Chiefs for us, our top general. He said recently, I'm not predicting at this point that I would recommend that those forces in Mosul and along the border would need to be accompanied by U.S. forces, but we're certainly considering it. Oh boy. He says there needs to be 80,000 troops at least to rout ISIS out of Mosul and in the territories they've captured in Iraq and Syria. He says, well, it could be Iraqi troops, but as you just read right there, maybe it's not just going to be Iraqi troops, maybe it's going to be some of us as well. He says the Iraqi troops, he's not sure, are up to the job because ISIS is doing such a better job of fighting them. Now, we've been training the Iraqi troops for, what, a decade? More? What are we going to have to do? Train them for 2 decades to see if they're up to the fight? Maybe they don't want to fight them. Maybe they don't think that is their land or their territory because they're Shiite and they don't really care about the Sunni land, especially because it doesn't have any oil. It has some oil, but not nearly the oil that the Shiite land and the Kurdish land have. So we're going to go on another fool's errand where we try to train the Iraqi troops again for the billionth time in a row. And then when we know we can't train them, oh, look at that. Golly gee, how did 80,000 U.S. troops wind up right back in Iraq? He says, now to be fair, I just don't foresee a circumstance when it would be in our interest to take this fight on ourselves with a large military contingent. Well, that sounds pretty good, right? I mean, although we've already put in over 3,000 ground troops in Iraq, no matter what we call them, that's what they are, 3,100 of them. And he's saying maybe that number could be significantly higher. And then he adds, but should the Iraqi military prove unwilling to take back Al-Anbar province and Nineveh province, the majority of territory in Iraq seized by ISIS, or should the new Iraqi Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi exclude Sunnis from power, quote, I will have to adjust my recommendations. So that is a reference to the recommendations he made to President Obama, which is, no, we don't need that many ground troops in Iraq. But he's saying here, I don't really care what Obama's policy is about not having ground troops there. I'm going to adjust my recommendations, and I'm going to tell him that we're going to put ground troops in Iraq. Here we go again. Okay, now, seriously, I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. Do you really think that the Iraqi troops are going to be properly trained this time around, take the fight to ISIS, and beat them without our assistance and without us having to put ground troops in? Anybody? Anybody really believe that? No, you don't believe that, right? So Dempsey's saying, we're going back in. Then Dempsey doesn't believe that. Dempsey's been trying to train them for 10 years and they're still untrained, right? You know why? As that sentence itself indicates from The Guardian, they might not want that land. They might think, I'm Shia, they're Sunnis, that's the Sunni land and it's fairly useless, I don't care. But we're going to make them care, we're going to keep Iraq together, whether the Iraqis want it or they don't want it. And you might wonder why. One, yes, hubris, etc. But the other is, we're not really as concerned about Iraq as we are about Saudi Arabia now. Because if ISIS solidifies in what was formerly Iraq and Syria, some portion of those two countries, and they're talking about volcanoes of jihad going all across the globe, but most importantly to Saudi Arabia, well, that's where we have real oil. And Dempsey and the American establishment is not going to allow that under any circumstance. So you think we're done with Iraq? You think we're done with the Middle East? We're not anywhere near done. Now, to give you a sense of how much that costs, just fighting ISIS in this very limited way, so far, is costing us $8 million a day. A day. Great. Not like our kids at home could use that. That winds up being $300,000 an hour for fighting. Did they clarify that as they do all their chest thumping on television about, we must fight ISIS, we cannot be weak, we must be strong? Did they say, hey, I'm going to take $8 million a day out of your pocket, you taxpayers, and I'm going to use most of it, by the way, to do what? Train Iraqi troops. They didn't explain that part, did they? And drop bombs, which apparently don't even work. Okay. How much has Afghanistan war cost us, to give you a sense of perspective and scale? More than $200 million a day. A day. We've been in Afghanistan for 13 years, spending $200 million a day. Did they tell you about that? When they started the war, when they maintained the war, after they killed bin Laden, and we're still there for years and years and years, after our own defense secretary said there's maybe 50 al-Qaeda guys left in Afghanistan. $200 million a day. That's insanity, man. Okay, how much have we spent in Iraq and Afghanistan? Look, this is by far the most conservative estimate I've seen. I've seen all the way up to $4 or $5 trillion. But right now, we've already spent $1.5 trillion, let alone the costs of taking care of our troops when they come back, and the list goes on and on. $1.5 trillion. Imagine all the bridges we could have built, the teachers we could have paid for, the education we could have had for our kids, the jobs we could have created at home. What have we been doing in Afghanistan for the last 13 years? And more importantly, in this context, what are we going to be doing in Iraq and Syria for the next 13 years? And just so we're clear on this, we've already spent, at a bare minimum, $5.6 billion fighting ISIS. That's the additional funding that President Obama asked for and has received. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Trillions are headed in our direction, or at least headed from our direction, out of our taxpayer pockets and into the pockets of people in Iraq, private contractors, defense contractors that need to build those drones and the bombs that we drop, and need to train all those Iraqi troops. Somebody's getting that money. It ain't you. It's coming from you. It's going somewhere else. Because ISIS really, really scares us, I mean the Saudis. And we got to make sure that we protect the good Iraqi citizens, I mean the Saudi oil. So ground and ground we go. This is just the beginning. Isn't that sad, man? We've been in the Middle East for 13 years. We've literally wasted trillions of dollars. And we're not at the end. It's a merry-go-round, man. There is no end. We're right smack dab in the middle of it.